Matt Milliner, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Good to be back.
It's always great to have you, and especially great to have you on Christmas Eve, live recording from Christmas Eve on Christmas Eve. Listeners, if you listen to this on Christmas Eve or Christmas, is very timely, but any day within Christmas tide, within 12 days of Christmas, it'll be seasonally appropriate because we're going to talk about.
Does this qualify? Is this a give and take Christmas special? Could we call it that?
This is the Christmas special. This is the Christmas special. Although we did do,
I love it. I love it.
We did do an episode. So we did an episode 2 episodes ago on Christmas movies with Todd McGowan and his co-host Ryan Englund, and they have a whole thing about Christmas movies about basically how the first thing is the castration of the authority figure, but not literally, but the emptying out. There has to be powerlessness of the archetype in the movie, and then there has to be actual salvation from cynicism. So there has to be a disempower and emptying out.
Oh, totally. Yeah, those are the necessary ingredients.
That's why they say Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and they make a big deal of the.
That's fair.
They make a big deal of the no shoes, of the bleeding and the no shoes and the vulnerability, and
yes,
it's very Hegelian.
It's virtually Pascal. Yeah.
They're very into Hegel's sort of emptying out, kenotic kind of thing. So it's a pretty good Christmas episode. But this is really the Christmas episode. This is the Christmas special, give and take.
Come on,
Professor Matthew Milliner, Wheaton College art historian, and I would say Mariologist. I'm going to say you're a Mariologist. I think that's fair to say.
It's a strange moniker, but I'll take it. I will take it.
Protestant Mariologist. I want to read you something, because Mariology, some people would say, is myth in the best sense, not myth in the sense of not true, myth in the sense of eternal truth, like something that in history that has something that speaks across the echoes of time. So in part of my morning devotions, I've been rereading The Birth of Tragedy by Nietzsche. And I just completed it. And Nietzsche says this in the end of The Birth of Tragedy. And now the mythless man stands eternally hungry, surrounded by all past ages, and digs and grubs for roots, even if he has to dig for them among the remotest antiquities. The tremendous historical need of our unsatisfied modern culture, the assembling around one of countless other cultures, the consuming desire for knowledge. What does all this point to, if not to the loss of myth? The loss of the mythical home, the mythical maternal womb.
Yeah.
Let us ask ourselves whether the feverish and uncanny excitement of this culture is anything but the greedy seizing and snatching at food of a hungry man. And who would care to contribute anything to a culture that cannot be satisfied, no matter how much it devours, and at whose contact the most vigorous and wholesome nourishment is changed into history and criticism? Into that emptiness, into this impoverished state, Professor Milliner, what does Mary as the God-bearer have to say to this cultural sort of starvation? Yeah. I think Nietzsche's speaking of 19th century Germany, but he could be speaking of 21st century, Western late stage capitalism.
And let's think of Nietzsche as the Bruce Willis's bleeding feet. He bears this sorrow of what it means to be mythless, to be godless. There are many beautiful Christian readings of Nietzsche, and one of them might be to say he's entering into what it really would be like to choose a world in which God did not become incarnate. And he agonizes over that and almost lifts himself up to say, do you want to be this? Do you want to be dismembered as I was, as I relive the Dionysian myth where he becomes Dionysus and is fragmented? There's a Giuseppe Fornari's 2-volume work on Nietzsche, just follows out this trajectory and says he is lifted up as this is what it would be like to be a consistent atheist. Thank God most atheists aren't consistent, because he is delivered into madness, which is exactly what happened to the Dionysus archetype, which preceded Christ.
When you say most atheists aren't consistent, do you mean here that there's a kind of Western atheism that thinks it's cut? I mean, I heard Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher say the danger is we're cutting the rose from the stem, severing the sort of biblical tradition and the Western philosophical tradition and things like this. But do you think there's a kind of atheism in the late modern West that thinks it's done that, but is really closer to the stem and is sort of running on fumes and is borrowing a lot from the Western tradition, which is this? I mean, our culture stands at the fusion of Athens and Jerusalem, right? I mean, there's this integration of the biblical tradition and a kind of quest for truth that happens in Hellenistic philosophy that gives birth to what we think of as a lot of what is the best of Western culture, with all of its problems, and there are many problems,
Yeah.
right? But there's something about this fortuitous or providential marriage that happens, and without that, I mean, if which Nietzsche says, hey, we might have to get rid of it, right? And it's dark.
Yeah, that's, I think, precisely what I was trying to get at. There's a sense in which the secondhand smoke off of the Christian tradition, the Tom Holland argument in Dominion, this, if you even care for the weak and the underprivileged at all, you're borrowing on Judeo-Christian values. The aroma in the empty bottle,
The
as
old Miller
Karl
Lite
Barth
commercial with Bob
put
Uecker, tastes great, less filling.
Less filling. Yeah, we had a whole middle school assembly hall paired, going back and forth. We thought we were being rebellious to our middle school teachers, but in fact, we were just being obedient to the consumer dictates that were shaping us even as young men. So all this to say, that I think is what Nietzsche is saying, is that if you're borrowing this idea that I care for the disenfranchised, you're not a pure Nietzschean. He moves in that direction. And in so doing, becomes the only example of what it would be like to truly ride off the cliff into a world of pure chaos, which ultimately destroyed him. And so I cannot recommend, I mean, you don't have to read those 2 volumes. Fornari's work has been translated into one single volume with his very original and deeply beautiful Christian takes on Nietzsche. So all this to say, you put this in conversation with Mary, you asked about this, is that he is saying we are in this mythless world. He's beginning to explore the darkness and to figure out what is this actually like. I have to give another shout out to a great book, Brian Robinette, and the difference nothing makes. So he also moves around in the dark and explores this concept of nothingness. And he has this wonderful chapter within it called On the Contemplative Consummation of Atheism. And he says, what you have to do is, if you are flirting with this possibility of sort of a godless realm, what you do is you keep pursuing it further, and you find yourself in actually quite familiar territory, the God beyond God, the God beyond our idolatrous conceptions of God. And you push further, and then you find yourself in the realm of the Christian contemplative. It's kind of quite beautiful. So all this to say, I mean, I don't feel like as a Christian that I hear what you just said and I say, oh gosh, I'm terrified, I wouldn't go there. I feel like I'm quite familiar with that territory. Have explored it, and it almost destroyed me as well. And I kept going through, and I come to the other end. And I want to be really clear about this from the get-go, Scott, because you rightfully pointed out, when we say myth, we mean truer than small t true. We mean capital T true. But there nevertheless is a sense in which one answer to Nietzsche was someone like, who actually has really interesting insights about Nietzsche, was Carl Jung. And Carl Jung comes along and says, Nietzsche is driven mad because he embraces this Dionysian creative excess, and it destroys him, and he never gets, and we know what that is like, and Jung sympathized with that. And his answer was to recover myth, but it was only these internal archetypes that were being reflected in the Christian tradition that he pillories in order to enhance his own understanding. So if we were to answer Nietzsche in that way, you and I would go into a 50-minute long kind of archetypal discussion where, when we're talking about Mary, we're only talking about our internal dynamics, kind of giving ourselves wholeness as you and I as men encounter the anima, the countersexual. And this is a part of my understanding of the Virgin Mary, but it is only a part of that. I'm not afraid of it. I can absorb all of it.
Interrupt you for
but
one
I
second?
we're talking about a factual reality. Go ahead.
I just want to ask you before we get it, because I do want to talk about the facticity of Mary, but I want to ask you something. You said that you've delved into where Nietzsche's going, and it's almost destroyed you. Do you think this is an experience that you're a Christian, you teach at a religious college, quite preeminent evangelical school? Do you think this is more, I mean, I've certainly more common, right, in late modern life, in late stage capitalism, in so-called secular, post-secular culture, teetering on this edge that can be an abyss. I mean, most people, I mean, look, if you're a pre-modern person, life was hard. You could die from a hangnail. You're burning 2,000, 3,000 calories a day just to survive. Meaninglessness and looking at the abyss of meaninglessness is not something that most people are looking at, I think, regularly every day. The way that in late stage capitalism, we're all pushed to, what the hell does my life mean? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What do I get up for? What story do I live by today? Who do I listen to? What voices do I let in my head? What people do I let judge me? Who on social media do I listen to? What's my North Star today? What compass do I set? What voices am I letting into my head? How do I find a therapist? Who's a good therapist? I mean, I can't even tell the truth to my therapist. I mean, this sort of destructive, does it all mean anything? And is there a God? And is the whole damn thing mean it? I mean, I think that there is something strange in our space that we're living in today, in this post-secular or whatever culture. That's a more common experience than it's not that we haven't had existential crises throughout history, right? But what you're saying, that you've struggled with it, other people, there are lots of people struggle with this, right? In a way that is probably not as widespread in the history of the Christian tradition.
That's fair, right? Because we have, comfortably speaking, in the West, we have comfort and security, relatively well fed. Not everyone, I quite understand that. And it sort of allows us and enables us to produce these new anxieties. Totally fair, as far as this might be unique for us. But therefore, the solutions that other centuries have, I think, are therefore all the more applicable, particularly in regard to the contemplative aspect that Mary points us to. She pondered all these things in her heart. She is the archetypal mystic for the Christian tradition. And again, because we're in the realm of psychology a little bit, I like the vocabulary of Jim Loder, Logic of the Spirit, a professor at Princeton Seminary, you and I both know well, and really extraordinary work. The Transforming Moment in particular is a fantastic book of his. And he was fully conversant with schools of psychology of the day. And what he managed to accomplish was giving us a new vocabulary for this nihilism, this despair that overcame Nietzsche. He uses the language of the void. And in his map of human psychology, he has, it's actually very sophisticated. I think it's like people should look at these charts to say, like, okay, now that's who I am. He was
for those of you who are not in this constellation of people from Princeton Seminary, the Luderites, they call him. He was just a singular personality that everybody that knew him he was a master. I mean, he was a virtuoso.
He was, yeah, and he was a kind of a little bit of an egghead in regard to trying to keep up with the realm of psychology with detailed footnoted studies, which is already difficult enough. And then he got hit by a car when he was changing someone's tire on the side of the road, and his wife, who's kind of small in stature, and you have to read these stories to believe them. They're all in print. He's really clear about this is what went on. He's not just telling fantastic stories. His wife, small in stature, the car had pinned him at this point that he was changing the tire on. She says, in the name of Jesus Christ, lifts the vehicle so that he can roll out of it. And he said that moment changed her and his life. And the big joke around Princeton Seminary was he was a portal to heaven. He would weep during his lectures. He was just overwhelmed with the glory of God. And people said he had regressed to Methodism was one of the critiques that was made about Loder, because in Princeton Seminary, this was not often the way most things occurred. But all this to say, in his chart of human psychology, he says, look, the void is real. He says, he plays out the thought experiment. He's like, let's imagine I'm walking home from my office. I trip on a rock. I knock my head on the curb and I roll into Lake Carnegie, which is a lake in Princeton, and no one can find me. He said, let's play it out. There's panic for, a week as they try to find my body. They declare me dead. There's a funeral. Everyone grieves and laments. And fast forward 2 years. My wife has at this point decided to move on. My children, sometimes they're on a first date and oh yeah, my dad, he died. He's like, I will be gone. This is the void. This is what haunts us, that mortality is real. My memory will fade. And he says that human psychology is designed as a buttress against that. And he says that this is why you need something with the octane of Christianity, because it has the metal to go up against the void and come out on top, not with your ego on top. Your ego is going to get shredded as you encounter the void. In some senses, that's the void's job, is to cut you down to size. And this is what Christ is referring to, where you die to yourself. And so all this to say, it's an extraordinary psychology. And what he's got, this will get us back to Mary. he has this map of the psyche that all these Jungians will come up with, but he upgrades it with all this better information, which I think the late Carl Jung understood. Honestly, I think he came around to this. And the best Jungian psychologists today understand that you don't want to deal with the middle Jung. In fact, Scott, they're now retranslating all of the collective works of Carl Jung because the translator was an atheist and was resistant to some of the religious vocabulary in all of his corpus, which is really interesting. So we await that. But all this to say, in Loder psychology, you have the external trinity, which is completely independent of who I am. And then you have the internal trinity because Christ prays in John 17 that they would be one as I am one. And there is this sense in which Christ enters the believer through baptism. And then you have all these other layers in between. And you sometimes have this external trinity wanting to meet the internal trinity. And as that happens, and the layers of physical life, which are obvious, the layers of psychological life, which are fine, but you have to go beyond psychology because then you get to these layers that are moving toward the mystery of God within. As that happens, the ego expires, but still is with us, right? Nevertheless, not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The Greek word there in Galatians 2:20 is ego, right? And so you have this deep surrender. And ultimately, and some listeners might be thinking, aren't you guys here to talk about Christmas? Oh, yes. This is why Mary is the archetypal believer. She literally bears, not in the way I just described. In this case, it's literal. She bears the Christ child. She bears the God-man. She bears the one who fashioned the world, the one who lit the fuse that set off the Big Bang, however you want to describe it, right? The one who invented the electron, however, she literally bears him. But at the same time, she also goes through all those internal dynamics, because Augustine said it was a greater thing that she bore Christ in her heart in faith than that she bore him in her womb bodily, which is an astonishing thing to say. So Mary emerges as exemplar of someone who bears God within, which is why no one can get away from her. If you want a Maryless Christianity, you're going to have to exit the religion. It's just, there's no way to get there. And I know there's some people who might want that.
To be like, if you fell in love with somebody, or you had, or you've had this friendship that was intense with a friend, and somebody that was a real kind of soulmate friendship, and you just didn't want to know anything about their family of origin, right? That you were just like, you know what? I'll pass on that.
Be kind of creepy.
I have an opportunity to go home with you for Thanksgiving. No, thanks. I'm not going to talk to your parents. I'm not,
that would end the relationship.
Yeah, or at least abortive. I mean, it would be severely abortive. It would be unusual. Yeah. And it would be counterintuitive, because when you're drawn to someone, you want to be drawn into their world. And what's more at the heart of Christ's world than Mary, than his mother, right? I mean, this is all of us are products of our moms, right? For better or worse, good, bad, and the ugly. We all carry that legacy with us, whatever the relationship you have with your family of origin. I want to ask you something. As we get into Mary a little bit, I want to talk, because we did say something, you're talking about history here, right? And there are many people, for those who don't know the world of biblical scholarship, like there are a lot of people that will say, Mark is sort of more the real thing, the bare bones thing. You just get a Jesus who kind of pops on the scene, runs around, talking, healing, boom, boom, bada bing, bada boom. And then later you get these legends and like Matthew and Luke and these little, you get the Charlie Brown Christmas and the shepherd. Remember the Seinfeld where they asked George, do you understand Orthodox theology? Well, not as much as you learned it, gentlemen, but I have the general story, the flood, the lepers, and so forth. The sheep, the ox, and they're saying that these are legendary layers, right? And the Christmas story, all this is sort of additions. It's not the kernel, it's the husk. I want to read something to you from Benedict XVI, where he deals with this in his little book on the infancy narratives, and he says,
lovely.
He's talking about why Mark's gospel might not have this and why it's a later development. See what you think of it. I'm going to run it by you, my resident Protestant Mariologist. He says, he dealing with all this, he says, I tend to regard as the one true explanation of these stories something that Joachim Nilke, following Gerhard Delling, expressed as a question. Might the mystery surrounding the birth of Jesus be a later addition prefixed to the gospel? Or does it not rather serve to indicate what the mystery was already known? It is just that there was a desire not to say too much about it, or to reduce it to an event like any other. And then Benedict goes on to say, it seems natural to me that only after Mary's death could the mystery be made public and pass into the shared patrimony of early Christianity. At that point, it could find its way into the evolving complex of Christological doctrine and be linked to the confession of Jesus as Christ, the
Yeah.
Son of God, yet not in the manner of a story crafted from an idea reformulated as a fact, but vice versa. The event itself, a fact that was now in the public domain, became the object of reflection. Understanding was sought. The overall picture of Jesus Christ shed light upon the event, and conversely, through that event, the divine logic was more deeply grasped. The mystery of his origin illuminated what came later, and conversely, the developed form of Christological faith helped to make sense of that origin. Thus did Christology develop. Does that resonate with you?
Thank you. It resonates completely. It strikes me as perfectly true. I think Mark is like almost like military field notes. Like, I'm in a hurry. I got to scroll things down. This amazing thing happened. I'm going to get it on paper as quickly as possible, and I'm going to get it accurate. But you're going to hear.
The baptism, I've got the healing, the exorcism, the cross. Get it out. Get it down.
Exactly. And then let me use a strange analogy. Forgive me, but I was quite moved by this. I'm driving up to Canada, and I see this rest stop, and there's this big plaque for this guy who, this Marine colonel. And there was a bullet casing right next to it in honor to him. And there was a flag waving there. And I just stopped to read the story. Well, he was in Vietnam, and a grenade was thrown into the bunker, and he put his body on top of it and saved all of their lives. And it just ended with, greater love hath no man than this, than he laid down his life for his friend. Now, let's use the analogy here. Let's imagine, you get a quick letter from someone in that camp, hey, Mom, I survived, crazy battle, more later. It's like, and then, he gets home and you're sitting around Christmas Eve and so tell us more what happened. Well, Mom, let me tell you, I wouldn't get into it with my quick letter to you, but someone saved my life, and here's his name, and here's what happened. Is he making it up? No, he has time to unfurl the story. He has time to go into details. And this is what's so funny as we wake up from the nightmare of historicism. And historicism, for those who are unfamiliar with that term, this is the reduction of events to references, the reduction, the elimination of meaning. That if we can figure out what happened then, we've hermetically sealed it, and it doesn't have to mean anything for us today. And it has a lot of positive benefit to it. The roll up your sleeves discipline of the study of history is meaningful and important, but it really hit a wall. And there were these generations of wonderful German scholars and their American equivalents and British equivalents who, let's just figure out what happened. And then we can all agree. Well, first of all, we never figured out what happened. We never agreed. And at the end of the day, we don't know as much as we want to know. But the minute you think seriously about the history, first of all, it can avoid those skeptical conclusions. And second of all, it begins to resonate with us in the present. And what I'm simply going to say is that I'm going to think as hard-nosed historically as I can right now. You ready for this? This is not
I'm
speculative.
Strapped in. The seatbelt is on.
So here we go. Jesus rises from the dead. They realize who he is. And the church is emerging, and Mary's at Pentecost. And, you never been in those one of post-church situations where people are kind of mingling afterwards. And I mean, was Luke there? Maybe. It's like, he's writing about it. And so Luke just kind of is like, this is a moment I don't want to let it pass. Like, I'm going to go introduce myself. Hello, you're Mary. Yeah, you're Jesus' mother. Yes. I wonder, could I set up a meeting with you? I have some questions.
Did he make his bed? Was he fastidious
Exactly.
Jesus in the
Right.
mornings? What was he like?
Yeah,
Did he always pick up after himself at table when it was his turn to clear the dishes? What was he?
And so he just did his due diligence. So, most excellent Theophilus, I've done the work. I have interviewed the people, and she's one of them, and he gets the details. And the tradition has retroactively imagined Luke to be the artist who painted the portrait of Mary and Jesus. I don't, as an art historian, think that probably happened. Why? Because they're anonymous peasants at that point. He has not risen from the dead. They don't know who he is. Luke would not have known to go find them. But what that beautiful legend tells us is that it's an analogy for his painting the gospel that unfurls the infancy narrative. That's what the image of Luke sketching Mary and baby Jesus is. It is indicating to us that's what happened in the gospel writing process. And so what you had there was, I've gone through the rigor of historicism. I understand there are these scholars. Did it really happen? Right? Like, fine. Great. I'll read that. But then, having come to the conclusion that these events really do seem to have occurred, what happens is, once one comes to that conclusion and the stumbling block of historicism is removed, and you realize, I just saw in the bookstore, I think Bart Ehrman's latest book is defending the historicity of Jesus, right? Just saying, look, he really existed. I haven't read the book, but I mean, one of these presumed skeptics who...
How many beach houses do you think these books have paid for? with the whole Bart Ehrman, like, hey, let me tell you what you'd even learn in an evangelical seminary about source criticism. But whoa.
Once you learn about Harper 1 advances, you're like, probably a couple. So all this to say, I don't know if that's the publisher. So what effectively it comes down to, once one realizes this event happened, we're dealing with something real, and Luke may actually be recording. Now, is there poetry involved? Of course there is, right? If I give, like, let's imagine someone comes along and says, instead of just telling you the story, my friend jumped on the grenade, I'm going to write a beautiful sonnet about his self-sacrifice, right? Oh, now you're inventing. No, now you're expanding upon the meaning, because it's why you're alive in the world. And so this is what happened with the revolution in hermeneutics, which is simply the fancy word from the god Hermes, the god of meaning, of interpretation, is this realization that great scholars like Gadamer come along and say, you can't know anything about the past without it affecting you. And if it hasn't affected you, have you really known anything about the past? Of course, historicism would be a temptation. Let's hermetically seal it all in the past. I can figure out what happened then. I can publish my book, and it doesn't have to mean anything to me in my wealthy professoriate over here. No, I wish it was that way. Wouldn't that be comfortable and convenient so far as my life is going well, right? What happens is you realize it happened, and then it happens in you. That's the mystery of Christmas. This is not some event that happened then. This is the event of events. This is the event through whom all events ever occurred functioned. I don't think God allowed the world to exist without knowing that one day this woman would ascend. I don't think he allowed it. I think that's what the mystery of wisdom, Sophia, in the Old Testament, speaking of the Septuagint translation of Chokmah, right? This great understanding of Proverbs 8. What does it mean that God made the world through wisdom? I think part of that is that God made the world knowing one day he would enter it. And that's going to require Mary. And you know, we're here to talk about, to some extent, Protestants and Mary. It's like, what's so funny, the joke is, everyone's like, oh, we Catholics, we love her so much. Well, hold on. This fall, you published a document that attempted to restrain the Mariology of the Catholic tradition. And there is a huge protest of that document that we're now dealing with, which is so interesting. And so, and
Pope
when
Leo,
so that's
Pope
on the Catholic
Leo,
side.
a sleeper pope, right? Pope Leo. You get this American comes out, right? You're thinking. First off, it was a Chicago pope, so it was interesting because there were, he was from Chicago. I think there's like 132 cardinals. He got 162 votes. It was a true Chicago election.
Yeah, that's right. Richard Daley at work.
It's 160. But it's interesting, right? Pope Leo comes out with this whole co-redemptrix thing, saying no, we got to back that out. Like this idea that she was in some circles that this is John Paul, right? The co-redemptrix language, and he says no, we're backing that off. Right. So
yes. Yeah. In this interesting dicastery document, which all this to say, so what I'm saying is we have these preset assumptions about what Mary is. And what I'm simply saying is just reset those. And what you have is an internal Catholic conversation of trying to tone down the language about Mary. And what I see in my Protestant tradition is an emerging, a higher understanding of Mary. And why do I say that? Because this whole idea of wisdom that I just brought up to you, it's so funny. Like the Orthodox have an incredibly beautiful understanding of Mary, the Eastern Orthodox. They got some of it from Protestants, which is which is why it makes some of them suspicious, but they did. There are great Protestant Marian mystics in the Christian tradition that most people don't know about, that great theologians like Sergius Bulgakov are borrowing from in order to have this expanded, deep sense of wisdom, which I just described to you, which is essentially saying, and again, that Mary is creation's primordial yes to God. And so when she says that, creation is finally breathing a sigh of relief. We've been That is, creation has been in agony, in sorrow, in groaning, and then finally we have this initial yes that ultimately is going to consummate in this profound cosmic redemption of everything. We're in the middle of that, and Mary is a hinge point.
Where is a Protestant in your own journey spiritually and in your own theological thinking did you find yourself saying yes to Mary? I mean, you say she's the yes to creation. When was the yes that you said in head and heart to say, man, maybe she should mean more to me than she does?
Yeah, and I think it's important. And I had a wonderful chat with Mark Laberton about this, and he asked me a similar question. And there was a time in my life as a Protestant where I wanted nothing to do with Mary, and I think that was totally healthy, right? Because I was coming from a nominal Catholic background where she had perhaps undue prominence, and I wasn't catechized very well. And often, if you're not catechized very well, Mary is effectively, a goddess right along. Well, just go to her, don't bother Jesus. He's got too much time. And I know that's a caricature, but it's also a caricature that I lived, right? This is what effectively was unfortunately taught to me by default, not by clearly laying it out, but that's just the culture that I was like. So when a tragedy happened, I'd grab my rosary. Okay, is this how it works? I just pray to her. And so when I learned the gospel of unmerited grace and what Christ did for me, presented to me in a clear way, and there's no need for mediation, he's done it all. I just went into it. Mary was sort of dormant in my life for a time. And what happened, I think, is precisely what happens to the Christian tradition over time. And it's so fun to see your own Christian maturation reflected in church history, right? I don't think that's a aggrandized egoism. I'm just saying, the human development of Christian maturity, in some senses, you can find that over time. And so just like as I hope, mature in my faith, then there's more room for Mary. In the same way, in the early centuries of the church, slowly they begin to say, let's think more about this woman and the way that she encapsulates the ecclesia, the church. This is an image from Revelation 12. This is the image of the bride from all throughout the Hebrew scriptures. And so it's natural that the church would begin to think in a Marian way. And then we see all these Marian churches, and then she emerges in this fashion. And yes, by the time we get to the 16th century, there's some clear abuses that need to be corrected. But I think what happened is slowly the temperature of my Marian devotion was increased, and only pleasantly so, only in such a way that it is not in competition with my relationship with Christ. And so, what I said to Mark, I'll say to you, she becomes less a theological idea, which we can battle about and think about and have ecumenical discussions about, but instead she becomes a presence. And that freaks some people out. Like, oh no, that's horrible. No, she's a benign presence, a positive presence. And so, and that just slowly emerges. And I happen to be in the Anglican tradition where there's a lot of space for that. And then you go on Marian pilgrimages, and those pilgrimages become deeply meaningful to you because there's something to the fact that at these shrines, there really is a deep sense of transformative power that overcomes you at these places. And so I've been to a lot of those now, to Marian shrines around the world, and those are powerful and beautiful experiences. And all of them only increase my devotion to Christ because she is the way he came into the world. It's that simple, right? It's like he takes his flesh from her with her consent. It's part of the mystery. And so I think what frustrates sometimes people that hear this, well, now you're basically, Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. I'm like, I know it's frustrating, but I want to develop this warmth of Marian piety on the Protestant side of things, because there's a reason that for Martin Luther and John Calvin and Karl Barth, she is the ultimate illustration of the very thing that the Protestant Reformation was recovering, which is the message of unmerited grace. She did not do anything to deserve this. It was a free gift given to her. All she had to do was say yes. That's the heart of the Protestant Reformation, and that's the heart of the Marian, I hate this word, but I'll use it, transaction of sorts as well. It is not okay, I'll meet you halfway, God. He comes along. He, of course, waits for her consent. But nevertheless, you have this beautiful, the great German word that Meister Eckhart uses that Luther picks up is Gelassenheit, this deep, deep surrender, this deep, deep contemplative surrender, as the internal Trinity by grace, not by nature, within us meets the external Trinity on the outside. The only way for them to meet is through the surrender of who we are. She is our great tutor in those mysteries. And so I feel like, I mean, why would you not want an elder sister / mother, which is how Christ refers to her in respect to John, which I believe also reflects us? Why would you not want to have that maternal presence in your life? I don't understand why that would be a distraction to you. I know it can be, if that's all you've got, but if you have a healthy, normal Nicene Christology, then that is to say that God from God, light from light, you have someone who God was confected in their womb, right? Not born, God has always been, but in the human nature of God, in the mystery of the Incarnation. I mean, that happens to you for 9 months. You're gonna have some. You're gonna be supercharged in a way. She's the archetype of divinization.
Leaves a mark.
Well, you'd think so, right? And I think part of that mark is her capacity to, again, all of this can be understood in a symbolic register. I understand that. But then there's the intercessory register as well, which is a big step for some people. And I understand that, that, you don't have to go in that direction of addressing Mary. You can just, but you can. But certainly Luther said you should, right? He's clear about that. We would be doing great in the Protestant church if we could just get back to a Mariology as high as Luther and Calvin's. We'd be in great shape.
If you could get Luther's Mariology, like yes to the Mariology, no to the anti-Semitism, you get you just get the right
exactly.
Luther. That's what we
definitely want. No to the anti-Semitism.
We want no to the anti-Semitism.
Yes
to the Mariology.
Amen. Because of course Mary's Jewish.
Exactly. Can't get around it. Good Jewish girl. I want to say this. One of the things that you talk about, this experience at Marian Shrines, I wonder, so many people in late stage capitalism, right, in the late sort of modern West.
Scott, I got to stop you right there. I got to stop you right there. What? Why is it late? I don't understand this phrase. Why is it late? How do we know that?
That's true.
It might be early. But anyway, I'll just stop you. Go ahead.
It's just what people say. It's one of
I'm
these
not
things,
saying I wish it was early.
It's one of the things you just listen
the Marxists
to enough. You just start parroting it, right? I don't know. Maybe we're middle stage.
Because the revolution's about to happen. Is that why? Okay. Anyway, you had a beautiful question.
You know why the revolution hasn't happened? The iPhone. People are too busy on app. People are too busy. That's gonna kill.
We're doing.
It's just I'm too busy, with Angry Birds.
The opiate of the masses.
The opiate of the no, but I think so many people are in fragmented family systems where there's just so much wounding and so much struggle with connecting to God is the source being like your own source being your own family of origin is such a painful spot. And it's not just patriarchal or paternal. It's we have narcissistic mothers and mothers that we have. We have absent fathers, abusive fathers. We have narcissistic mothers. We have so many. With the rampant rise in addiction, so many people are being parented by people that are just struggling with chemical dependence and alcohol abuse.
Totally.
And so many. I wonder how in that world that we're in, how Mary is a healing presence to people whose family of origin maybe they haven't been mothered well.
Scott, that's the heart of it. I think you got to the heart of it. Is that it's not the reduction of any of this to psychology, but to leave out the psychological element is a great risk. I have a wonderful mother, but no, in some senses, and I have a wonderful father, but in some senses, no mother or father earthly can be enough. We all say that about our fathers, and then we point to our Heavenly Father, right? That is, we being Christians, right? But there's a maternal aspect to this too, that I want to say to anybody out there with kind of a difficult maternal situation and who doesn't have one. In fact, it's one of the great challenges to the Christian faith, which is an interesting challenge. Is Christ fully human if he had a perfect mother? Right? It's like he doesn't know what it's like. He doesn't know what it's like. But again, this is the question of Mary's perfection, and that's a whole nother story. So all this to say, if you have had a difficult maternal situation which affected your upbringing, and I love Thomas Keating's definition of original sin. It's kind of indisputable. The state of growing into intellectual, human, social, psychological maturity without certitude of your union with the state of growing into maturity without certitude of your union with God, which is obviously going to cause all these problems developmentally that I call my personality. It's like, this is what we're made of. And so this is
Right.
Luther's great insight of, at the same time, justified in sinful way. We are messed up. And in that situation of being messed up, there's this wonderful gift that is right there in the Bible when Jesus says to John, "Behold your mother." Please stop being a historicist about that passage and saying, well, clearly understanding the Greco-Roman context of widowhood and what do you do with a woman who no longer has a son to help her? He is simply providing material sustenance for her. All of that's fine, but to think that it ends there, have you read the Gospel of John? Is not the woman figure that shows up a mystical myth, in a sense, in the best sense of myth we just described? Is not the beloved disciple attempting to invite you into that mystery? And therefore, that is a transaction that Jesus wants to confess between you and Mary. And you, behold your mother. This is the glory of the Guadalupe story. Did you not know, Juan Diego, that I am your mother? That you are in the hollow of my mantle, that I care for you? And everyone freaks out and says, well, now, Matt, this is exactly why we're worried, because now you're giving this ministry to Mary that should belong to God the Father. And I look at that and I say, well, then we need to cease any preaching from the pulpit, because that would be giving to a minister what only belongs to God the Father. They're like, well, no, we should have preachers. Why is that okay? Right? Come on. There are beloved mediators that put you in touch with Jesus. I just don't get that objection. Again, it is a dispensation, a ministry of sorts that she very well may have been given, that she wants to provide for the entire church. And obviously we have to be careful, test everything against the scriptures and be in deep conversation with the Holy Spirit. But I believe that the Holy Spirit, this is one of the ways that the Holy Spirit works. And it is the way I describe it to people. It's a wing of my house that was all boarded up that I didn't know I had. And lo and behold, it's beautifully furnished.
Oh, wow.
And I just wasn't using it.
Yeah.
And I walk in and I take the plastic off the sofas and I turn on, put some fire in the fireplace. I'm like, there's the Marian wing.
There's a wet
it's
bar
this
right
wonderful
in there.
thing. That's right, exactly. And again, people are allergic to it. And when they're allergic to it and they freak out when I say things like this and they say, how can you teach at Wheaton College? It's so funny. The minute people say that, I'm like, well, I just walked into our president's office and he pointed, he said, hey, Matt, did you see Songs of the Nativity, selected sermons on Luke 1 and 2 from John Calvin? He said, oh, the rich Mariology of Calvin. I mean, like, it's there. I mean, so when someone is allergic and they freak out, I think like, oh, that wing is still boarded up for you. I'm so sorry. I'm not going to bug you. But you asked, so I'm answering. And it's funny, people ask me, they say, where's the best Mariology in the tradition? Honestly, Scott, I know you didn't ask that, but I just put those words in your mouth. I think it's in the Protestant tradition. You might say that's ridiculous. I think the best Mariology that I've read in the last couple of years, and this is, as you said, I'm a Mariologist, so it's kind of my job. So I hope that's saying something, is in George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin. And what you have in this, my friend Tim Larson republished it with a nice introduction. It is an astonishing tale, fairy tale. And what you have is this young woman who she's faced with these goblins, and she has this secret grandmother that only she can see, who's weaving this beautiful thread. And then she has this friend Curdy, and they have to go into the goblin realm and they take this thread with them. And without that thread, they'd be doomed. And the thread is there and it's woven by the grandmother. And that's the only thing, without question, the only thing that gets Curdy out as he goes on that salvific quest into the cave to defeat the goblins. And he gets back out, and then she's like, I'm so glad I get to introduce you to my grandmother, because she's the one who wove that beautiful thread. And Curdy, they go up to the attic where she is, and Curdy's like, I don't see anyone. And the princess is like, well, she's right there. And he's like, I don't see anyone. And she's so wounded, but she's the one that helped you. And then essentially what MacDonald frames as a situation is where the princess goes up to the grandmothers and said, why can't he see you? And the grandmother's like, you just relax. Yes, I helped him, but he's not ready for that right now. So I'm just going to continue to help you and help him. And I feel like that's where Mary has been in so many ways. She's like this invisibility in the church and this secret grandmother. I mean, can you ask for a better depiction than we have in George MacDonald, it's almost higher than some of the over-pitched Mariology of the late antique era and the High Middle Ages. But again, all of it is just in this wonderful maternal sense of she's the one where Christ gestated. And in some kind of mysterious mystery, she continues to have a role in helping the church. None of what I'm saying is requiring the specific doctrines that Roman Catholicism promulgates about her, or some of the things the Eastern Orthodox say. I'm just saying there's a wonderful, wild, weird Mariology in the Protestant tradition that has been completely ignored, just like the invisible grandmother that Curdy can't see. And it's time for us to kind of bring her out of the closet and say, hey, let's let, I mean, Scott, I cannot tell you, I just got finished teaching a class, 40 students, they fight to get into it with my amazing colleague, Dr. Amy Peeler, who's in the New Testament studies. And she does scripture, I do history. And we just run out of time because the student presentations are so overwhelmingly good that we want to get to them as quickly as possible. And to the last student, each one of them are like, gosh, this is adding a dimension to my faith that I just was missing. And we have Roman Catholic students in the class who are like, thank you for giving me a chance to share about my devotion to Mary that is not in competition with Christ, unlike all the, the evangelical freshmen that I talked to that said it was. I mean, they have a chance to express their point of view. Thank goodness, right? And we meet these different wings of the body of Christ come closer and closer together under our one mother. Ron Ritgers, the great Lutheran theologian at Duke, written a lot about Protestants and mysticism. Beautiful volumes on this. He just said because again, people think that doesn't exist. And he's like, well, you need to study a little bit more. There's a lot of it. And he has this wonderful line that he wrote in one of the many books that came out about the Reformation in 2017. He's like, you can't have two mothers. And when Protestants are faced with the equally competing claims of orthodoxy is the true church and Catholicism is the true church, they can't both be right. Because you can't have two mothers. There's one mother, meaning Ecclesia, Mary, symbolically speaking in regard to the church. And what I've just done is I've shifted my Mariology into speaking symbolically. I can shift it all over the place, right? You have to be able to kind of zoom out and zoom in regard to Mary. And what he's saying is that that's why we in the Lutheran tradition, in his case, need to unfurl our Mariology because there's only one mother for all of Christianity. And there can only be one. So I just think exciting things are happening in this Mariological world. We could talk. I mean, anyway, I've gone on long enough. What else do you want to discuss?
One interesting thing that Benedict also notes in this wonderful little monograph on the infancy narratives is just that Barth points out that there are two moments in the story of Jesus where God intervenes directly in the material world. It's the virgin birth and the resurrection from the tomb, where in which Jesus did not remain nor see corruption. And he says these two moments are a scandal to the modern spirit. God is allowed to act in ideas and thoughts in the spiritual domain, but not in the material. That is shocking. He does not belong there, but that is precisely the point. God is God, and he does not operate merely on the level of ideas. In that sense, what is at stake in both of these moments is God's very Godhead. The question that they raise is, does matter also belong to him? And I was thinking of, when I reread that, I've been rereading this over the past couple of days, and I was thinking of Will Wilmot tells this story about when he was the chaplain at Duke, where the student comes to him and says, he preached on the virgin birth. It was, in the holiday season. And he said, do I really have to believe in the virgin birth? He says, well, I guess not to be a Christian, but this is entry-level stuff. We figure if we can get you to believe this, we can get you to believe that the poor are really the rich, that that the meek shall inherit the earth, that the peacemakers will be the children of God. So this is the entry level stuff. Once we get you to swallow this, but isn't that on some level, right? That God's lordship over the womb, unless there's some openness to that. I mean, where will the lordship be over your own broken psyche, over your addictive past, over the self-defeating stories that haunt you night and day, that you're not enough, over the voices of guilt and shame that make your life a living hell, right? I mean, isn't this material? I mean, the lordship of the material means that God is right through Mary, through this intervention in creation, through Mary, through this that you've said so beautifully, it's been not plan B, but plan A. That's where God makes space to be in our synapses and in our psyche and in our nervous system. I mean, I think the book, The Body Keeps Score, right? In the soma, in the trauma of our nervous systems, that God is Lord of all of that, right? Through the Virgin, through this comes in through the womb of the Virgin.
Scott, I just want to say that last 1 minute of speech from you is the heart of the Christmas mystery and of Christianity. I mean, you said it perfectly, right? And what you said is you're not believing in the virgin birth so that you don't have to deal with all the messy psychological reality of yourself. And does Christian faith function for some people that way? Surely, surely. But you gave us this holistic understanding where I believe in a physical virgin birth, which I had nothing to do with which, you know, it's so funny. Like when Joseph had the dream of the angel warning him, you know, don't go to Herod and get out of, you know, they're going to kill you. It's not like he woke up and did like Jungian dream analysis. I wonder what part of the aggressive nature of my psyche Herod represented. He's like, no, it was a, so you're dealing with a literal physical virgin birth, which happened mysteriously. And we can get into that. I mean, I love how the Christian tradition has all kinds of ways of somatically understanding that. Sometimes the Holy Spirit goes through the ear, sometimes through the lips, sometimes directly through the womb. It's this whole body experience, which I think vastly transcends sex as we understand it today. It cannot be measured by sex, which is the kind of reduced imagination of the Freudian pop psyche. It's like, no, you understand this was probably much more pleasurable than sex as we understand it. The Christian tradition has deliberately restrained from getting too into the details. It was an amazing experience that brought God into the world. I'm just allowed to, like a good director doesn't show you those scenes, just to leave that there. Somehow the virgin birth happened. And what you just said so beautifully, Scott, is that this is a physical reality. And then it can become a physical, as in the sense of my synapse is being healed, physical reality for me as well. That's the both and. And the historicists tell you you can't even have the historical, and so they don't even give that to you. And maybe a Christian historicist would redeem the virgin birth and not bring in any of these psychological dimensions, and you're inviting us. And I think God is inviting us into the wholeness of the mystery. Mary is the archetypal mystic who is inviting you to bear Christ within. All of the tradition says that. I can point you to Protestant sources, Church of the East sources, that is, who didn't agree with Chalcedon, Miaphysite sources, that is, Coptic Christians, to say nothing of Lutheran, Reformed, Anglican, and of course, Eastern Orthodox and Catholic. I mean, all of the tradition invites us into that mystery of bearing Christ within. Maybe Augustine says it best: try to find the merit. Try to find the justice. Reflect and see if you can find anything but grace in Mary. And when we hear that message of unmerited grace, our souls open too, and we're ready to receive this. And that's why he says it's a greater thing that she had that faith experience and then she was able to bring Christ into the world. What a mystery this is. It's just a mystery. It cannot be understood. It can, in some senses, be adored and worshiped. That's who we worship, the one who was confected in her womb. We don't worship her, but she is the one that made that mystery possible for us, thanks to her ascent.
To be in this Christmas season, to be in the wave of that kind of receptivity, to be in the wave of Mary's receptivity, and to be receptive to the grace that started the revolution that happened in the Virgin's womb.
And Scott, you said matter and citing Benedict, and what a great book that is. And thank you for bringing it to us. And it's not, I think it's kind of wonderful that mater and matter kind of come together in our language. And so I think so it's not just us, right? It's all things. I saw my friend Alan Jacobs shared an image of the Nativity at the Byzantine Museum in Athens that is one of the earliest. And it's just the crib, and it's just the ox and the donkey, which represents the Jews and the Gentiles, and there's no people there. He did it for them too, right? All of nature, all of the cosmos is destined for a similar yes. And I know that's hard for us to understand.
Carol of the Birds, there's that one line where there's the Fitch its Lord now owns, where it's thinking of all the birds.
How perfect.
Right. It's imagining the birds around the manger. It's beautiful.
Come on. And this is what I refer to, cosmic Mariology. And everyone gets freaked out like, oh no, now she's going to be a goddess. No. It's suggesting that her ascent is what God is hoping for all of us and all things. And I think it's going to be much easier for all things to come around to that when we're ready. That is to say, when humans have given the totality of their ascent, which in the midst, will that be everyone? I don't know. but there are more certainly who are to be included who probably are not born yet, which is why the great consummation has been delayed. This is Robert Jensen's great answer to, some student at Princeton University asked him, like, why doesn't the New Testament seems to say that his return will be very soon, and it doesn't seem to have happened. Why? And Jens just goes, because he wanted to include you.
Jen said that to me once. Jen said that to me in his office once. Said the same
Isn't
thing
that
to me.
Totally.
Yeah,
Isn't
he wanted
that
to
great?
include you. Yeah,
Right.
why,
So I was just say, so there are many more. And I think when that fullness comes, right, and I don't know when that will be, then I think creation will come along. And we see glimmers. Anytime you see something beautiful in creation, you see that. But when you see something wounded and pained in creation, it is also a reminder that this world as it now is wounded, it's damaged. And I think that's a biological fact. That is not some projection of my Christian faith onto nature. I mean, check into, pick up a science book. Weird things and dark things seem to be afoot in creation, even though it's good, right? And there is a nature red in tooth and claw, right? I don't think that's the ultimate aim. And this is what Isaiah is getting at, is that when this final full ascent comes to full fruition, there's a Marian dimension to that as well. So she's not just the mother, she's the bride. And again, what I'm referring, I wrote an article once, and the title of it was Meister Eckhart's Mary, and then in parentheses, is you. And it's so hard to get this across when mystics like Meister Eckhart and Luther was a mystic, speak about the internal birth of Mary in the soul. They're not reducing it to that. That's what some kind of lazy-minded pop new age who, half-educated person, God bless them, but they don't understand the tradition. They think it all can be reduced to that. This is this kind of sloppy, casual, not mysticism, but what Evelyn Underhill called mysticality. I don't have to go to church because it's all about like kind of my private confection of, I realize my already total oneness with Christ. And it's like, no, this is a communal enterprise, but you are nevertheless an indispensable part of it. And so every time that one has the rendezvous with God, there is a Marian dimension to that. That's why I think it's perfectly appropriate to begin those moments, which I hopefully are regular, with a Marian prayer. Behold the handmaiden of the Lord. Mary said that, and I hope I'm saying it too. And yes, this does kind of, file the edges off toxic masculinity, because I'm required to come to Christ in a feminine voice, in the vox feminina, right here I am. And I'm like, well, okay. And that is not to reduce the mystery of masculinity, which is also a great part of the mystery, but it certainly is to speak of this depth of psychological human wholeness. Who I am ultimately cannot be reduced to my gender, but my gender is a certainly important part of it. So we are in deep territory that the Christian tradition has been almost kind of against its will drawn into, as it has things like Christmas Eve services and nativity sermons, where the Christian tradition just finds itself thinking, oh my goodness, this is how it happened.
Yeah. It's so for our listeners, Matt, this has been so great. And I just, you emphasize Mary's yes, this receptive yes, and I hope for folks wherever their faith traditions as they're listening, because it's a diverse audience, they can hear something of that yes to their being in these holiday seasons, in the rat race, and in the kids crying, in the malls, in the other, do people go to malls anymore? And all that was stressed out of the shopping and the this and oh my God, I don't want to see this relative at this thing, and oh my God, I can't wait and all of this. I hope that they can hear the yes. I hope that they can hear the echoes of Mary's yes to them and to their being. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. My resident Mariologist, friend of the show. Thanks for coming on and talking about Mary with us.
Thank you, Scott. Merry Christmas, friend.
Merry Christmas.